Welcome to our event today, My Womb, My Choice, Breaking the Stigma for Women Living with HIV. It's a very important conversation today, and we thank you all for joining us.
Forced and coerced sterilization remains a concern for women living with HIV for very many reasons, but I'll only raise 4 significant issues that I feel we need to be concerned about, and which I know Florence from a global perspective and Patricia from a regional perspective will be able to highlight this, while Nyokabi will go more into the details of the legal issues arising. But the first and most important thing for us to think about why this remains key is the fact that it's a violation of autonomy and informed consent. Forced and coerced sterilization goes to the heart of robbing or denying women the ability to choose, the ability to make an informed choice without their full and voluntary agreement. This denies them to make a decision about their own bodies and a decision about their reproductive choices, especially when it comes to family planning methods. That's the most gravest thing I pick when I think about issues of forced and coerced sterilization and why they need to continue to be a matter that needs to be addressed, whether legally, through advocacy, or any other means. The second one, which is also very specific to women living with HIV, is the aspect around stigmatization and discrimination. Many of the women, and particularly the clients I worked with, were largely subjected to forced and tubal ligation because of their HIV status. Somewhere, someone thought that they were not fit enough to continue having children. Someone thought because of their HIV status, they were bringing more children to the world and causing them to be a burden. And for that sole reason, and the court agreed with us in both cases that Nyokabi will speak with, that merely subjecting women to tubal ligation because of their HIV status amounts to an aspect of discrimination. And so that's the second reason why we need to remain concerned about forced and coerced sterilization of women living with HIV, because it is a discriminatory act that subjects the women to get stigmatized in society, in their communities, and in their families. Thirdly, we all know that both men and women have a right to make reproductive choices around what family planning methods or what contraceptive they want to take into account, how many children they want to have, how large their family should be, who they want to marry, and whether they want to have children, that person be the father of their children or the parent of their children. These are all choices a human being has to make, and this choice is normally taken away when the women are subjected to forced and coerced sterilization. Some of the women I've interacted with faced this without their knowledge, and it only came to them later in years when they were trying to get more children and couldn't get them, for them to discover that they had been subjected to tubal ligation without their consent. This means their reproductive rights and their reproductive choice was taken away from them without their knowledge, without their information, and without their consent. Again, we go back to the issue of consent. Consequently, many of these acts have an impact on the physical and the mental health of these women. Many of the women I've interacted with, many of the clients I've interacted with, many of the participants I've interacted with both in Kenya and outside Kenya have talked about the profound and lasting effects that forced and coerced sterilization has on a woman's mental and emotional well-being. And in cases where the partners have stayed on or not left them because of the stigma, it has seen them feel like they are powerless. Some continue to get traumatized. Some continue to have psychological distress, and this has a great mental toll on them. And some women have even ended up facing violence from their partner, causing them to get physical injuries because of the current situation they are in, the inability to give birth to children, the inability to continue bearing children, which may be desire for some of the particular spouses. All these things also accumulate to the fact that access to healthcare and the quality of healthcare someone is supposed to get is highly compromised, because if women have the fear that because they're living with HIV, they'll be subjected to forced and coerced sterilization, it means that this impacts negatively their ability to engage freely with the healthcare system, the ability of the healthcare system to protect them from discriminatory practices, and this continues to contribute to the violation of their rights. So all in all, what forced and coerced sterilization does is that it violates the rights of women, the ability to make a choice, the ability not to be discriminated, the ability of their dignity not to be taken away. And so as Kellyn, as people who focus on human rights, and as people who are also commemorating the Human Rights Day, we are concerned about this particular practice, and we are concerned to the extent that we would want to see what measures, what systems are put in place to ensure women don't face such practices, to ensure that where they face such practices, there is a framework, both legal and a policy framework, that ensures there's sufficient redress for them if this ever happens to them. How then do we work closely with healthcare workers to ensure that they understand the importance of consent, the importance of respecting the rights of women? How closely do we work with those in authority to appreciate the fact that the legal and policy system must respect the rights of women? So the issue of forced and coerced sterilization of women living with HIV is not an issue to be taken lightly. It's an extremely grave issue, because we all know the importance that is placed on womanhood, on the ability to bear children, and we all know what it means to take that choice away from a person. So as we continue into this particular conversation, I urge you all to engage with this discussion from a sober manner that has a very negative impact on the lives of many women, both nationally, regionally, and globally, and that going forward we will continue to find lasting solutions beyond litigation, beyond advocacy, but long-term, medium-term, and even short-term solutions where this is happening, for us to be able to ensure that all women living with HIV are able to live a happy life, a life that ensures they make decisions about their own body, especially that concerns when they want to have children, what contraceptives they want to take, and who they want to be able to engage with.
I just wanted to talk a bit about this litigation that Kellyn has taken forward. It has taken a period of 10 years in court, just over 9 years, about 9 years, 8 months, so I'm comfortable calling it 10 years. There are two main petitions that I will speak about. One is what we call Petition 604, 606, 605, and another one is called Petition 606. While they had different petitioners, these were actually claims that were similar, just that they were brought against different health facilities. And what these cases were about was a group of 5 women who had been denied the right to make a choice with respect to whether or not they could get permanent family planning methods. In the first case, Petition 605, the petitioners reported being threatened with withholding of food portions from the facilities where they were getting their food portions and medical assistance. And they were informed basically that if they did not provide proof of having undergone a permanent form of family planning, then they would not be allowed to access some of those food portions. I also need to mention that this was in a period when there was extremely high stigma around HIV. I acknowledge that there is still some stigma today, but at that point, around the 2005s, I'm sure we all remember what it was like at that time in terms of stigma. And on top of that now, government had started programs for the elimination of parent-to-child transmission. So this was happening in the context where there was a lot of fear and a lot of misinformation around what women living with HIV could or should be allowed to do, much of which was rooted in discriminatory attitudes towards HIV. There was also the question of being induced into accepting certain procedures. for the promise of covering of medical expenses. So, for example, for some of the petitioners, they were expecting and they needed to undergo cesarean sections, and they were told that if they presented themselves at such specific health facilities, that their costs for the cesarean section would be catered for. Generally, there was a lack of provision of information around what other available options were there. We know that there are short-term and there are long-term family planning methods, and then there are permanent ones. So they would not be given information about what the differences between these would be, and even where they were told. So, for example, they'd be told maybe in Kiswahili, tunakufunga, but nobody would explain to them that kufunga is a permanent form of family planning, which meant that then the women would probably go through this kufungwa not knowing, and then now later on, a few years later, try to get pregnant again without success. So there was just generally a lack of information and misinformation. And this was not peculiar just to the women who brought the litigation. They were just a subset of women who came forward to go through the court process. But the question of forced medical procedures is something that had been documented for some time, as early as 2011, in a report called Robbed of Choice, where many women from around different parts of the country reported being forced into reproductive coercion, or basically being forced to go through certain medical procedures, and then being told that this was because women living with HIV could not give birth. Maybe you're told that your immunity is very low and you should not be able to give birth. So for these 5 of these women now opted to pursue litigation. And after 9 years, we got the first judgment in December 2021, while the second judgment was delivered in 2022. The judgments are very long. We've provided summaries, I'm sure also for the online team, but there's specific things that I'd like to point out that the court talked about. The first is with respect to what is informed consent. Now, there is consent and there is informed consent, but the court really went into a very in-depth reading of what the question of informed consent should look like. And this was because many of the women who report having undergone forced or coerced reproductive procedures is because they come from different areas. They are sometimes of lower socioeconomic status and different literacy levels. And generally, we do know that healthcare provision or other healthcare providers can sometimes speak in language that not many of us may understand. So there's some sort of jargon that can be used that many women will not be able to understand. And the court set out 12 grounds through which we can actually say that informed consent has actually been procured. So the first thing is that the age of the patient must be ascertained. In one of these cases, the patient in question was only 20 years old, and yet she was subjected to a forced medical procedure. And that's one of the things that the court really interrogated to consider. What does it mean when a woman or a girl is very young? The second thing was whether the patient is a minor, and when the patient is a minor, do they have any ability to actually understand what is being told to them? The third thing is with respect to disability. We know that women are very different. Some suffer from different kinds of disabilities, and whether that disability then would also mean that it can hinder them from understanding what a doctor is trying to explain to them. The court has also said that it's important to ascertain what the literacy level of a patient is. So when a woman and girl actually presents themselves to a healthcare provider, and in this case, the discussion around what the background of the patient is had to do with ensuring that somebody is not being coerced because of their socioeconomic status. So, for example, if the medical expenses are being met by somebody other than the patient themselves, to what extent is that circumstance coercing this patient into accepting a specific reproductive health intervention? The court also talked about what other information should be given. So it's not just about going and getting a family planning method. the court has said that it's important for healthcare providers to ensure that they are providing as concrete and as comprehensive information as possible, including the broad range of what other methods that are possibly less permanent or less restrictive, so that the patient can have enough information through which they can actually make an informed choice. One of the most important things that the court has stated in these two judgments has also been about the patient's right to refuse, so that the patient is actually informed by the healthcare provider that this is probably what is being offered to you, but you have the right to refuse, and should you refuse, then these are the potential consequences. And here, it has to be not just about the medical risks, the legal risks, it's also about the medical risk, so that a patient can know that if I refuse or accept a specific kind of intervention, this is what I expect my life to be like going forward. And then lastly, the court just talked about generally, the healthcare providers are under an obligation to ensure that the patient has actually understood. So technical language must be avoided, and the healthcare provider must get into a sort of conversation with the patient to ensure that they have actually understood and grasped the meaning of what's being talked to them. And if necessary, there should be enough information, enough time given to a patient so that they're able to make an informed choice without undue pressure. Because as I'm sure many of you know, sometimes women are afforded the information immediately and told to make the choice at that point in time. So the court has said that this cannot happen, especially in the case of bilateral tubal ligation, because it is because of the very permanent nature and the far-reaching consequences that it has. So that's what basically the court said on informed consent. It's now one of the most comprehensive meanings or explanations on informed consent that we have currently in Kenya. So generally, after considering what could constitute informed consent, the court just sort of gave a summary, calling informed consent a cumulative process. So it's not just you're ticking a box of 111, but because the first one has been fulfilled, you've given somebody information, you've ascertained their background, you've told them what the explanation, the consequences could be, you've explained to them what their life would be like after you've given them space and time. The accumulation of all those things, not just one of each, means that that accumulation of steps is now when the patient now gives permission to whatever reproductive health intervention that they can then get. The court has also stated that actually this responsibility rests on healthcare providers. What this means is that every healthcare provider, even if it is a referral facility, we have seen where women go to one facility and then are referred to another facility. That is quite common in this country. But now what the court has said that the healthcare provider has an individual responsibility to ensure that those steps that we've talked about around informed consent are actually broken down and communicated to patients in a language that they can understand, and this includes the duty to offer alternative forms of contraception, so that women are not only receiving information around what it means to have a bilateral tubal ligation, but it's what other options could be more appropriate for them. So in the whole, the court found that in the context of the women who had gone to court, there was no informed consent. And because there was no informed consent before they were subjected to forced medical procedures, therefore their rights were violated. One of the things is that it was unfair discrimination for three reasons. One, the women who were the women who had presented themselves to the facilities, all of them had one thing in common. They all had HIV and they were all receiving food and medical aid. So the court found that it was because that they were living with HIV, there was what we called indirect discrimination, mainly because they were just women, and then because they were of lower socioeconomic status, they had no one else to turn to to receive this food and medical aid, and thirdly, because they were living with HIV. The court found that it was unfair discrimination all around, and there was no rational purpose to subjecting these women to forced procedures. And it found a violation of various rights. So first, the court affirmed in no uncertain terms in both judgments that actually it's rooted in discrimination. The forced and coerced sterilization of women living with HIV is rooted in discrimination. So it's a violation of the right to equality and freedom from discrimination as provided under Article 27 of the Constitution, under Article 43 of the Constitution on the right to the highest attainable standard of health, including reproductive health care. It was completely undignified, and therefore it undermined the right to dignity for these women, and it also violated their right to found a family, because they then could not choose when, if, or how, when and if they could actually have children after they interacted with them. So those are the judgments right now. Unfortunately, the litigation has not stopped. The journey is still continuing. We had Kelly was supporting these women together with an organization called the Africa Agenda Media Initiative, and the judgments both now are on appeal. One of the things that we had hoped the court would do was to outline what the state duty was going to be in relation to women living with HIV. What is the responsibility of government to ensure that women living with HIV are able to access services free from reproductive coercion and free from stigma? So we are on appeal on that question, just asking what the state responsibility is going to be. And then, of course, there are other aspects that have been raised by other respondents within the appeal. So that is where we are right now. We are continuing with the appeal, and we continue to look forward to your support, both for the petitioners and for the community in terms of advancing the litigation forward.
The stigma is so much, because I remember there was a time when they used to say that women living with HIV are weapons of mass destruction, in that we will infect children when we get pregnant, and maybe when we are trying to get pregnant, then also infect our sexual partners. So those are some of the things that when healthcare workers were looking at us, I think that is where they were going, just to make sure that we are no longer getting pregnant. So maybe stopping us from infecting children. So when we were looked at, the stigma, the better part of the stigma was about we being weapons of mass destruction. The other component that I want to bring at home is the fact that women living with HIV do not know their rights. These rights that Wakili has been able to articulate very clearly is not at the grassroots level. As I'm speaking to you, I'm in a vehicle. I'm coming from Homa Bay. Right now, I'm heading back to Nairobi. And the women are meeting, because we are doing a prevention of vertical transmission. The women are meeting have no idea about these things we talk about. So one component that is lacking is the issue of empowering women living with HIV, so that women with HIV can be able to know their rights, and then after they're able to claim it. Because when they go to the facility and the nurse decides it's a TB ligation, they'll not ask any questions. It will just be done. And they don't know why. And they'll just say, the nurse said that it is important to do it. Patricia, myself, with the knowledge I have, I remember going to Aga Khan and being told that because of your age, I was 37, because of your age and your status, you should not have another child. I was coerced at that particular time, and I agreed with everything. The doctor said, yeah, because of my age, yeah, because of my status, yeah. If I, with the bit of knowledge I have, would be coerced to the level that I had tube ligation done, I didn't think very deeply. Being aware of the information I'm aware of right now, I'm quite aware of information right now. You can imagine that was Patricia. So what is that woman in Turkana? Does she have this knowledge? That woman that I've just left in Homa Bay, does she have the same knowledge? No, she doesn't. It's only the information that can give them power. It's only the information that can help them to be able to ask somebody that they are not giving their consent to a particular procedure. But without information, what is happening now will continue to happen. Because even the medics themselves, when they believe on something, they believe on that. Just sometimes back, we were denied access to DTG, because that is also still our sexual reproductive and health. They said that women of reproductive age should not be given DTG. And yet DTG is one of the best medications that we have that can be able to suppress the virus within no time, and it is safer. And why was that? Because we are going to have children, and then the children can get neonatal the problems with the brain, and that is how women were denied DTG, not from just the local level, but up to the WHO level. They make decisions on behalf of women living with HIV without their consent. They just made a blanket decision that women living with HIV will not be given DTG for something that happened in Botswana, that 3 kids were found to have a condition in Botswana for children. And the research had not even they had not even finished the research. They had not even gotten the numbers that they were looking for. But they made a blanket decision that women in Africa were not going to be given DTG, yet DTG was something that was being given in the West. So that is how it happened that we would not be given DTG. We had to fight back to be able to have access to DTG. Issues surrounding our sexual reproductive health and rights. When we go to facilities and you want a method of family planning for the younger generations, or even they'll ask you, you are HIV positive, you should be using a condom. Why are you asking for family plan or any other method? They have already made a decision that you cannot look for something else. You are just supposed to have one barrier method, and that is condoms. So the issue of our sexual reproductive health rights is a big issue. And one thing that I want to say, Wakil, is that women need to be informed so that they can be able to claim these rights. Women are not claiming the right because they do not have the information. So I believe that even as we go on with the court case, then the issue of informing women of their sexual reproductive health rights should continue, so that we have a strong case and we also have an empowered women, not only in Kenya, but across East Africa and across Africa as a whole.
And co-sterilization of women living with HIV happens the world over. It's, in my view, starts from the point at which people look at our women's bodies. And I think we have been pathologized too much. Ever since, for all of us who joined into the clinic, just go back to the first day you came into the clinic and ask yourselves the things you were told. Before long, you quickly realized you're just the disease. Your body is for making sure children are not living with HIV, or for ensuring our partners do not get HIV. And this thinking from the health facility is why people treat us like this. It's why we allow for people to treat us like this. It's why we sit into support groups and take responsibility for not disclosing our status. It is my job to make sure I disclose. It is my job to make sure if we have a child who's positive, it is my mistake. We don't look at the every other thing that may have happened. And so for me to start this conversation, I must start by calling out how women's bodies are looked and viewed in the HIV sector. We need to start looking at women as people with desires, as people with needs, as people with pain, and not just a vector for bringing children to this world or for ensuring we reach men, because that is all that we are known for. My question was, has this happened elsewhere in the world? In 2015, the South Africa Commission for Gender Equality, CGE, confirmed that there were 2 women who were forced and coercively sterilized in 2 provinces in South Africa. Similar cases were reported in Chile and in Namibia in the same year. In Chile, for example, a civil society organization took cases for almost 47 women to court. Currently, the work of the International Community of Women Living with HIV Global, ICW, works to document these reproductive injustices amongst women living with HIV. And we have cases in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Tobago, in St. Vincent and Kitts, I think I got that right, amongst other places. So this is a global phenomenon, and that's why we don't need to look at it like an isolated case. And that's why I am starting the conversation from how do we view women's bodies? Because if you view a woman as a human being and not just like a person whose role is to bring a child to the world who's not HIV positive, then some of the experiences that Patricia has also alluded to would not matter. Why must women constantly risk being left out of getting the best HIV treatment because it's not safe for children? I have been in meetings where I argue for these things, representing our issues. The most recent was the conversation around the WHO guidelines on viral load, from which now WHO confidently says a person living with HIV who is on treatment and cannot and is undetectable, has a viral load reading that is undetectable, cannot pass this virus to a sexual partner. There was a whole conversation about women and children, women and children. And I had to ask people, but do you not realize that there's only a small percentage of women that are mothers? And there's a big percentage of women that are just sexual beings. And to decide to make one decision for women of reproductive age, whatever that is not only punitive, but it also takes away from our right to access treatment, optimized care. And these are some of the challenges that then translate into discriminations of this kind. I had a chance to sit next to a doctor coming out of a obstetrician conference. It's called the FIGO conference, happens every 2 years. And this doctor explained to me why, if you see the poverty in those women, you know we have to do this. And it pained my heart because he was justifying why they had to do the sterilization. But it's because, again, as a woman, you don't exist. Your role into this world is what people see. What do I think we need to do? I think I will echo on Patricia's comments. This is a global problem, and it requires the guts, the collaboration of partners that have worked in the case that has gotten the result it's gotten in Kenya. The women who took the risk to stand up and face this. GNP Plus recently released a global stigma index report, and it shows that of the people living with HIV from 25 countries who felt violated, 73% sought redress. It means we are starting to feel the need to go and seek justice. Seeking justice is part of empowerment that everyone must get for themselves. We cannot be victims forever, and we need to show the way by showing people where we cannot negotiate. We have to use the law to ensure that we access these human rights that are inherently accorded to us. We have launched by WHO the validation on triple elimination of HIV, syphilis, and hepatitis. WHO organizes countries to go through a process of checklisting their services, how they work, and everything. And this ICW Global leads us at the global level with this work. Precious from Eswatini, I think, is the representative. Lillian from ICW Eastern Africa is just the outgoing representative. So they check this checklist, and there is a whole component on human rights. So that is where you have to document your processes around, is Kenya meeting the 95 goals for children, eliminating syphilis and STIs, eliminating hepatitis, but without to take up this responsibility of checking and confirming and constantly keeping our countries on check. So there are processes like this that continue to also identify how countries must proceed in terms of being acknowledged as game-changing, but in a way that is rights-based. I think there is a whole opportunity in the science of U equals U now that we must use as women. If you use your HIV treatment and you are undetectable, you cannot pass this virus. This, for me, is one of the biggest messages that gives me relief. I am now not responsible for ensuring the world doesn't get HIV. I just need to take my treatment. And I think where women want to have children, there's an indication of minimal risk, and that should not be used to stop women from accessing the science of U equals U. But can we organize for prevention interventions for women? Because there are many. There's dual preventions, there's the pivotal ring, there's PrEP, there's all these interventions that we can begin to make available for women. But I would like to say that there's a whole message here that if we empower our women with, so that we can begin to look at ourselves differently. I sat in support groups. I'm seeing a lot of my peers here. Habari zenu wa Kenya wenzangu, my fellow Kenyans. I am seeing you, people we've worked with in this journey from when I was in Kenya many years ago. I've sat in support groups and felt like, oh, now do I need to disclose? And now I sit comfortably say I'm a woman living with HIV because I don't feel like it's supposed to stop me from doing anything, particularly dating. And so, but why? It's because there is science here that I can use to break the stigma I feel for myself, break the stigma around me, but also challenge everyone around me to think about women a little bit differently. I want to end by saying all this work requires a collaborative effort. We just won, but I heard there's an appeal. So it means we need to dust off and start the journey to the next level. Kellen will need our help. All the women that stood up against this injustice need us now more than ever. GEM need us now more than ever. I want to sit here as GNP Plus and say we are in solidarity with you, not only because I'm a Kenyan, but because this is the highest form of injustice and it should make us all angry enough to do something about it.
We need to go back to the drawing board and continue to think about additional interventions that we can have to ensure that this form of reproductive injustice is not happening again. So thank you all very much. I want to allow me to please bring this to a close. It doesn't mean that the conversation is over. This is just going to be, it's just one of the many things that we want to do to ensure that we are continuing to enlighten people, even as we have a positive court judgment and even as we go through the appeal process, so that we can continue with this. I'd also really like to say a special thank you to the women who allowed us to use their stories to showcase these violations, just to thank them for their, they have been indefatigable. I think Alan has also mentioned nobody gets paid a salary to do this work. We do it, a lot of them is because they don't want to see this happening again. Asanteni sana.